Hi, everybody. Steve Cady here with our Change 2025. We have a wonderful group of people here today, and with Jackie Stavros, who is going to share with us some really fun, interesting ideas. Jackie, when I think about your work, I think about the day we talked many years ago when you were just starting with SOAR, and we were talking about what you were going to do with it, and how entrepreneurial you are, intellectually entrepreneurial you are, and creating cool ideas and stuff like that. It was really a lot of fun way back then, and to see where things have gone and so forth since then. We have David Bright here from the Academy of Management. Welcome, David, our sponsor and partner with the series, the Academy of Management's ODC division. Eric's here, and he's with ODC as well as MC division. He's chair of that, and he wants the MC division to be a part of this, which would be great. So if we can do that, that's awesome. And we've got Bowling Green State University. We've got Teo here, who's the associate director for the program. We have Jillian and other students. Brandy, I can see many. Dale, there's too many to call out. I think Jake, and I see others. And we have Nexus for Change. So we have a lot of partners. This is a community effort to bring knowledge to you. Our doctoral program is a professional doctorate that focuses on helping people advance their thought leadership in service of their passion within a human-centered field, the human-centered field of organizational development and change. And that's transforming organizations, revitalizing communities, and developing human potential, which I think is something that really connects all of us here. And so I'm really grateful for that. And Jackie, again, I'm really grateful. So Jackie and I'm very honored that she and Bill Rothwell called me up and said, "Hey, join us on." I don't have the previous edition right by me of the Practicing OD. We've been working on that for a couple of years. Jackie is the lead editor for that and is guiding us in building and creating this book with a bunch of amazing authors around the field of ODC. And that book's coming out in 2026. And so that's been a really fun. And Jackie, what I appreciate about you is how you're able to do all that you do within the context of contributing to the field, taking care of all these students, doing the work you do on dissertations and work at your university, creating cool entrepreneurial ideas and taking them out there and people adopting them. And I think we have Eric here, and he has people from his class joining today because he so much loves your work and thinks that SOAR is a really great tool that's impacted a lot of people in their organizations. So your work is prolific, and it touches a lot of people's lives. And I'm really looking forward to today, you kind of diving in with your angle. I'm curious where you are today compared to where you've been and what your latest thinking is and those kinds of things. I think that'll be fun to hear about that today. And so again, welcome everybody. And Jackie, welcome. Thank you for taking the time to share with us today.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that introduction. And I want to thank you, folks. Life is busy. For you to spend an hour or so with us is amazing. So thank you for that. I got up really early this morning and thinking, I got to put together 30 years of stuff into 50 minutes. And so this morning I got up and I created this little, I call it a guidebook or workbook, so that if I'm going too fast near the end, it's about 13 pages, but it gives you generative questions and some ideas for sort. And I literally got done with that about 10:15 this morning. I sent it to Lisa and I said, you could put it in the chat, leave them afterwards. But I thought, okay, I felt better thinking I can get through everything because there's a little guidebook for those of you attending this session. So thank you. Thank you, Lisa. Lisa is so responsive, answering my questions like on a Sunday afternoon. So she has been amazing. And thank you, Steve. And I typed in the chat, our press proofs are due Monday. This is an amazing book. It'll be the fifth edition of Practicing OD. I joined Bill Rothwell and the former Roland Sullivan in the third edition back in 2010. And I got to tell you, this one is the most exciting because, well, we got Steve on the editorial, but it's just we've got over 50 contributors this time. So I am really, really excited about that. So kind of relax. I'm going to do something very different with this presentation because the power, I think, of everything is in the questions that we ask. And so I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to start this presentation, and I am going to ask you to participate a little bit in the chat. So thank you again. This is the title of the presentation, Conversations that SOAR, and that's going to be where we're going to be ending this journey today is on SOAR. I look at today as a gift to you. I think what I want to share with you definitely makes an impact in organizations around the world, definitely can impact your life, but it can impact your communities and your family. So what I'm having to say here, I think your best return on investment will be just in your own lives. So knowing that the power of our conversations is really the questions, I decided to present 4 questions to you this morning. Where are your conversations taking you and others? I really want you to think about that. In the OD world, back in 1997, the first book on the change interventions, the change handbook, had 17 methods in there. And then Steve joined the second edition in 2007, and there were, I believe, like 60 methods in the book. And it's so big now that it's literally online. And I believe that every intervention involves a conversation. So that's the power of our words. Then we're going to talk about humanistic AI, 2 simple practices for a conversation worth having. So we will talk about that book in this question. And then how can your questions help you and others soar? So we're going to take for a moment, where are your conversations taking you? And have you ever thought about how your conversations influence anything, yourself and people? And the tone of your conversations can put others on the receiving end in a protect mode or connect mode. And your questions that you ask, or even the statements you make, can either make someone sink or soar. And when you think of the definition of OD, it's a behavioral science. And this is probably one of my favorite quotes by David Cooperrider, who was my dissertation chair and just influential in everything that I've been doing, is that we live in the world our conversations create. I want you to type in the chat and just listen to my full question first. From when you wake up in the morning, like I said, I was talking to myself this morning and I wasn't even fully out of bed yet, but from when you awake in the morning until you go to sleep at night, what percentage from 0 to 100% of your day is conversations with yourself, with others, on your phones, when you're texting, when you're Snapchatting, when you're doing emails? But from when you wake up in the morning to when you go to bed at night, what percentage of your awake hours are you in a conversation? And it includes talking to yourself. So just type the percentage in the chat just to humor me. 85%. Yes, Stephanie, 100%, 90%, low estimate, 90, 80. Nobody's clocking in over 120%. And that's how big conversations are. Managers, people who are managers spend 70 to 90% of their management time in conversations with others. So that's a lot of time we spend in conversations. Okay, so what I want you to do is I can't see you. I can only see Eric at the top of my screen and Lisa, but I want you to close your eyes for a moment. Close your eyes. I want you to recall a conversation where the tone was depreciative, critical, negative. It's a critical, destructive conversation. I want you to find that conversation. You could have been watching TV, the news, you could overheard it. You could have been part of that conversation. All right, open your eyes, and I want you to type in the chat, how does that feel in your body? I want you to type in the chat when you're in that critical, destructive. Yes, Brandy said it's heavy. David said it's tense. It's heavy. Like I'm screaming, paralyzing. Yeah, this isn't a healthy place to be. So again, I can only see Lisa and Eric at the top of my screens, but I want you to take your hands and stretch them really high. Come on, Lisa. Come on, Eric. I want you to put your hands behind your head. And Eric, I want you to unmute for a minute. Where are your thumbs pointed?
Sorry, it took a minute to unmute. Pointed down.
Pointed down. We don't want to be there. That's bad. Put you in a protect mode. If you have a stopwatch, I would bet that your heart rate is up, all the blood, everything's flowing to put you in that protect mode. And when we're in that protect mode, that reptilian part of our brain, we want to freeze, scream, we want to run away. It's really, really bad. I want you to take a deep breath. I want you to close your eyes one more time. And I want you to think of a positive conversation, an uplifting conversation, a conversation that's great. A conversation you had maybe with somebody, a student, a significant other, a client. Open your eyes. You're in that great place. Now I want you to type in the chat, how does that feel in your body? Open your eyes, type in the chat, how does that feel? Energized, yes. Recharging, Jillian said smiling, yes. Happy, tingling and relaxed. Thank you. Energy, you feel safe, you are motivated. This is where we want to be. And a lot of, I know you're going to hear from Richard Boyatzis down the stream in this series. And this is the prefrontal lobe of your brain. Put your hands up on the front of your brain here in your forehead, and your thumbs are up. This is where we want to be. This is the executive function of the brain. This is where we're connecting. And there is a lot of science about what words do to you, to your body. So the nature of our conversations make all the difference. So this is a really important thing, the nature of our conversations. And if you think about it, your conversations, your tone, your words can bring people above the line. And these are some of the words you typed: positivity, open-minded, you're feeling gratitude, respect. And if you're below the line and your tone is depreciative and it's devaluing critically of others, you said there's judgment, closed-minded, toxic, blame, and shame going on. This is really bad for your health and the health of others. And that's what I want you to understand with this first question, is that below the line are destructive conversations. We want to spend less than 0.5% of time in here. And I'm going to talk to you how to get out of that red square when you're down there. And then there's critical conversations. And we probably spend, all of us, 5 to 10% of our time in critical conversations. And that's when you think, what were you thinking? How could you do that? These are critical questions. And how do we move from critical questions to conversations worth having? We really want to be above the line. And the science says, if you look at some of Barbara Fredrickson's work, is coming to my mind, a 3-to-1, an 80-20 rule. I so appreciate your willingness to take the lead on that. And these are affirmative conversations, or I think we should go with plan A. And someone says, well, I have plan B here, and we're listening to each other. These are affirmative conversations. However, we're not asking questions. There's nothing going on curiously to understand deeper someone's plan A or plan B until you're in a conversation worth having, asking a generative question. What do you see as the benefits of plan B? And that's where you're beginning to really learn to ask questions. Or how might we combine the best of plan A and plan B? These are conversations worth having. And I learned, I'll talk a little bit about appreciative inquiry, but it wasn't until 2018 that I figured out everything we do is with conversations. If you think about it and you look at the percentages that you do, and the outcomes from a conversation worth having is that you make the invisible visible. We surface assumptions, you create shared understanding, you generate new knowledge, and it inspires trust and possibilities. So what's really important to do before I introduce these practices is to really understand your location. Now I'm going to show you a 3-minute video clip, one of my favorites. You may have seen this before. I show this in every presentation I do, and I welcome you to also use this presentation. So we're going to look at the conscious leadership group and the importance of, where am I when you're entering?
One question that conscious leaders ask themselves over and over is, where am I? To support leaders in locating themselves as they ask the question, where am I? We offer this tool, a line, a simple black line. At any moment, all leaders and all people are either above the line or below the line. Our location describes how we're being with what is occurring in our life right now. If we're above the line, we are open, curious, and committed to learning. If we are below the line, we are closed, defensive, and committed to being right. Stop right now and simply ask yourself, where am I? In this now moment, am I above the line or below the line? Typically, when people are below the line, they believe certain things about the world. For example, they believe there is not enough. It could be that there's not enough money, or time, or space, or energy, or love. People below the line also believe that their story about the situation is right. People below the line also believe that there is a threat out there. Something or someone is threatening their desire for approval, control, or security. And people below the line see the situation as serious. The deeper below the line they are, the more serious things look. People below the line tend to behave certain ways as well. They tend to cling to an opinion, find fault and blame, gossip, explain, rationalize and justify, get overwhelmed, and avoid conflict or pursue conflict for the sake of winning. When people are above the line, they believe that learning and growing are more important than being right. They believe that all people and circumstances are their allies, here for their growth. They believe that from a distance, almost everything is funny. People above the line live in curiosity, listen deeply, speak unarguably, question all their beliefs, and live a life of play. Now, knowing what you know about being above or below the line, where are you? One thing to know as you consider this question: we are hardwired to go below the line. Literally, our brain is programmed to perceive threat, and when it does, a chemical cocktail courses through our veins, and we go below the line. This reaction was designed to help us survive in the presence of a real threat to our physical survival. An issue for modern-day leaders is that often our brains can't tell the difference between a threat to our physical survival and a threat to our ego or identity. We react and get defensive when we experience a threat to our ego. So in many ways, being below the line is natural and normal. But when we are below the line, we're not in a state, literally brain state, of high creativity, collaboration, innovation, and relational connection. We're simply trying to survive. Leaders today can't thrive if they're in survival mode. So the first activity of conscious leadership is location, location, location. In this now moment, where am I? Telling ourselves and others the truth about our current location begins the great conversation.
So I hope you enjoyed that video. It's probably one of my favorite videos. And when Sherry Torres and I first wrote Conversations Worth Having, we realized we can't jump people into learning how to ask generative questions and practice positive framing, because if you're in a negative state, this is really hard to do. If you haven't had enough sleep, if something's going on in your life and you're below the line, it's hard to be appreciative. It's easy to be appreciative when you are above the line. And our editor, who is Steve Parasante from Barrett Kohler, asked us after like 3 years, he says, you need to do a second edition already because there's something missing. And that something missing was the chapter 3 that we call Tuning In, that I want to share about with you, that the importance is there's surface level awareness where I can see you and notice maybe by your actions or how you look, how you're feeling, but there's so much beneath the surface that I don't know that could have you below the line. And if you think about it, conversations about conflict, problems, and issues are typically charged and people are in a protect mode and stress is high and negative emotions and behavior could be authoritative or defensive and connection is really missing in action. And what we learned that if you are unaware of this, you can choose your mindset, or within a quarter of a second, if you're not aware of this, it's the amygdala hijack. And what's going on here is you're reacting and you're responding based on where you are, and you may not even know where you are. And so it's really important that if you can just begin to feel, I asked you how you felt earlier where you are, you can realize I need to tune in. I need to pause, just take a deep breath and feel how good that is right now. And get curious and ask yourself, where am I? And this comes from Andrew Huberman, and he was in the summer of 2024 on Jimmy Fallon. He got the highest ratings because he was teaching people in the audience the importance of how to breathe. And then there's a video clip that I put in here of breathing exercises. So just when I say to everybody, pause and take a deep breath, what I'm doing is I'm resetting your parasympathetic nerve, and I'm actually bringing you to a line because I'm asking you to take a deep breath or two. And then I'm asking you to be curious. And Harvard Business Review in 2018 did an entire issue that when we are curious, we naturally ask great questions and view tough situations. The entire issue was the business case for being curious. So the next question, I told you I'd have a lot of questions. People sometimes call me the SOAR lady, but today I'm the question lady. I want you to type in the chat. When I say generative AI, or we're going to talk about AI today, what does that mean to you? What do you think we're going to talk about when I say generative AI? Or let's talk about how we're using AI. Just type that in the chat for me. Top of the mind. Now, I want to know, Ford, what does AI mean? Like the A and the I. Top of the mind. What does AI stand for? Art, thank you, John. Yeah, that's the top of your mind. Everything's about artificial intelligence. Uh, Never heard of appropriated intelligence. Thank you. It also means artificial insemination. Yeah, I'm asking you the top of your mind. Now, I have to tell you that what Ford was typing, possibilities. Yeah, those of you in the OD world probably know that what I'm going to talk about is appreciative inquiry. Um, but when I show up for presentations and people hear I'm going to talk about AI, they typically think I'm going to talk about artificial intelligence. There's another kind of AI that's been around since 1985, and that's appreciative inquiry. And it's what I like to call the humanistic AI, and we live in the world our questions create. And this was developed, it was part of David Cooperwriter's dissertation, his research. One of the books that has his dissertation in it, it's called Perspective Theory. We live in the world our questions create. And he tells the story about appreciative inquiry, how it came about with his project on the Cleveland Clinic. I know David Bright was in this program here. Ron Fry has been part of really co-creating what appreciative inquiry is. And when I learned about appreciative inquiry, it was 1995. There was no 4D or 5D cycle. There was just these principles out there. Matter of fact, David Cooperwriter was my qualitative research instructor, and he taught a class in my doctorate program called Appreciative Ways of Knowing. And we were going to learn about grounded theory and something called appreciative inquiry. And what I've learned about appreciative inquiry is that the word appreciative means to value, to add value, to value people in the situation. And inquiry is asking questions, being curious, wondering and searching for what generates life. And what I can tell you 30 years later from being introduced to appreciative inquiry, it's my operating system. And I'll tell you what I mean by that in a second. But this is a quote by David, that appreciative inquiry feels productive and meaningful engagement that creates conversations worth having and a positive leadership legacy. So David Cooperwriter wrote the introduction to the book Conversations Worth Having. We had invited David to write the foreword. And typically a foreword is 705 to 750 words, maybe 1,000 words. And David's foreword came in like at 2,500 words. And the editor said, "What are you going to cut out of this foreword?" And we said, "Nothing. We're going to make it the introduction to our book." He really read the book, and it was a great introduction. We didn't have the introduction written. And the editor said, David's going to let you have that as the introduction. I said, yeah, we're not even going to go with a forward from the book. This is the gift of Conversations Worth Having, is David wrote the introduction to our book, and David had no problem. And that was, again, another gift. And one of the things he says in the introduction to Conversations Worth Having that I love is our organizational lives and the lives of others flourish or flounder one conversation at a time. And that's a pretty powerful statement. When you look at appreciative inquiry, I like to say in a nutshell, it has 5 principles, the 5D cycle, and 2 practices. And the principles, when I first learned about appreciative inquiry, these are the original principles. The constructionist principle, that our words create our reality. The simultaneity principle, the question is the intervention and impacts the well-being of others. The poetic principle is you have a choice in how you ask questions and how you make statements. You have a choice in what you get to study, how you get to frame a situation. In the anticipatory principle, we see what we expect to see. What are we anticipating? And the positive principle is positive image, positive actions produce positive results. So David's gift that came out of his dissertation were these 5 principles. And a lot of people know about the 5D cycle, and they just skip over the principles and they want to use the 5D cycles. So this is my interpretation. So if David's principles came out in 1985 and I met David in 1995, the 5D cycle didn't even come into existence until like 1997. Now, I'm a storyteller, and I love this story that I heard about how this 5Ds came into being. And it was from Ada Jo Mann, a colleague of mine, because when I was working on my doctorate, I was working with the GEM Initiative. And 1997 is when this came out. And Ada Jo Mann was telling me about a project they were going to work on with, I think it was Save the Children. And they decided that when they came together, the first thing they were going to do was a discovery, and then they were going to dream about what's possible, and they were going to design something. And then I said, well, how did the 4th D? And the initial 4th D was delivery. And she said, well, in David's family, there's David, Dawn, Deborah, oh, and there's a brother. His name is a D. I can't. Well, we got to have a 5th D. It'll be delivery. You can see how scientific the 4Ds were. But it was really discovery, dream, design, and deliver. And that last D has been called destiny, do it, deploy. And the define D didn't come into play. I like to give the OD area credit for that, is you got to define what the task is. So even this 5D cycle has evolved over the last 20 years, but it can really guide you on an affirmative topic. It can be for an organization, 2 people, a team. David once wrote an article, The Smallest Unit of Change is Yourself. And so the 5D cycle to me is like a methodology that we can use to choreograph a conversation we want to have with people. So that's a little bit about the 5D cycle. And, if you were to search and type appreciative inquiry and the 5D cycle in about 6.3, in a quarter of a second, you get 6.3 million answers today. So appreciative inquiry has been out there for quite some time. And, everybody would say, oh, it's rose-colored glasses, appreciative inquiry, you're ignoring the negative. And this is what I like to tell people. And I say appreciative inquiry is not about ignoring the negative. It's about seeing the world differently, like through the eyes of a child. The very first article I ever read on appreciative inquiry was about the idea of wonder through the eyes of a child. So I was in my doctorate program, and that was the very first article that I have read about appreciative inquiry. So when I'm trying to tell people what appreciative inquiry, this is it in a nutshell. It's the search for the best of what was, what is, and what could be. So I've just answered the second question as quickly as I could because I got 2 more questions. But if you could just type in the chat, what is it about appreciative inquiry that really resonates with you? I like that. Dale has 5 boys: David, Doug, Dan, Dale, and Dean. But what is it about appreciative inquiry? Maybe some of you heard it before you got here today. You heard my story. We all have our stories. Um, Thank you, Stephanie. Curiosity and human connection. I love how it leans into natural strengths and curiosity, positivity. It's life-giving. Yes, life-giving, the positive core, the life-giving factors. Yep, positive framing. It works. Yeah, it is. It's my operating system. It's how I work. Which brings me to what are two simple appreciative inquiry conversation practices? Because that's what Steve had asked me to talk about. When I was looking at, I always design a presentation based on what Steve had emailed me, and he said, and discover how transformative conversations can give that innovate and collaborate to success and about appreciative inquiry. So having grown up in the appreciative inquiry world with the creators of appreciative inquiry, Sherry and I when we were writing conversations, we had 6 practices, and our editor said, you can only have 2. What are the 2 appreciative inquiry practices? People aren't going to do 6 things, Jackie. And I think if he could have it his way, he would have only allowed us to have 1 practice. But we talked him into 2. And the 2 practices are generative questions and positive framing. And I'm going to go through this part of the presentation quickly, but you have access now to a guidebook that I sent Lisa literally a half hour before the presentation that has lots of generative questions in it and examples of positive framing. So generative questions widen the screen. Now I'm going to step back for a moment. When I first learned about appreciative inquiry, it was called the unconditional positive question. So of a lot of the writings in the 80s and the 90s and even in the year 2000s was about unconditional positive questions. And then in 2007, I read an article by Jervis Bush, and it was about generative inquiry, generative questions he had talked about, or he called it generative inquiry. And Sherry Torres and I were very intentional that when we wrote Conversations Worth Having, we were not going to call it any longer unconditional positive questions because sometimes you can't ask a positive question in really bad situations. And I was dealing with an organization that dealt with suicide, and they said, you can't even bring in the word positive, Jackie. And so at the time, it was Jervis's article I went back to and thought, yeah, generative questions widen the screen. Think about how I asked you about a great conversation. I widened your screen. And when I took you to a destructive, critical conversation, I narrowed that screen. So generative questions is what the language that since 2017 I have used going forward. The power of generative questions is they challenge our ordinary way of thinking. And they're typically what and how questions. What else might explain what happened? How do you see it? How do they manage that process? They're very curious types of questions. They're intentional because we're trying to widen the lens. We're curious. We want to make sure that we're adding value. So here's a situation. I'm sure it's happened to all of you at one time or another, and you could have been the person doing what I'm going to talk about here. But let's say you have a person or a member who is always late for an appointment and never, when they arrive, they never acknowledge it or apologize. If you could just type in the chat, what is your reaction to that person? What's your reaction? Annoyed. Yes, Kaylee, annoyed. Seething frustration. Yeah, a little bit irritated, feeling disrespected. Yeah, that's our reaction. Remember the amygdala hijacked? And what I'm learning I've learned more since the Conversations Worth Having book, probably than my last 20 years. But what I've learned is we are all in this reaction. If we could just tune in and ask ourselves and get curious, questions I might ask myself is, where am I right now? What are my feelings about this situation? And your feelings can be annoyed, worried. Now, Heather said calm because I don't know what's going on in their life. That is curious. That's above the line thinking. And that's where we need to learn to spend time. Who chose this time? Asking yourself, this is a standing meeting. I said this is a weekly meeting. Might there be a better mutually agreed upon time to meet? Am I the one who made this 8 o'clock in the morning time? What would happen if it was 8:30 or another day of the week? What don't I know? And what am I making up? And so we do that a lot. We make up things. And so what we need to ask the other person is, does this time work for you or for our meetings? Or what happens either at work or that you're late? You know, you're curious, why are they always late to your meeting? And what's going on that hour before? And what are you hoping for our time together? And begin to have a conversation. Do we need to meet every week? Do we need to meet at this time? And you're actually having a more connected conversation that you're curious about than competitive, irritated conversation. So when I got to this slide, I was, thinking about this early morning, that intervene, you can lead with the question. Always you need to pause, breathe, and get curious. Where are you? And ask yourself, what can I, how do I shift the tone? How do I pick a generative question? And I was trying to put in to ask you what your favorite questions were, and there was just too many questions I wanted to share. So generative questions are typically what and how questions. And I say typically. And so that's where I put the guidebook together at the last minute, Lisa, and she put it in the chat for you. There's a couple pages of generative questions that you can learn to ask. Appreciative Inquiry started with 5 core questions. Tell me about a great experience. Tell me about what's going on. How are you feeling? What is the positive core? My favorite one is always, what are your wishes? Especially when I'm in a situation with someone and said, how might we move forward? So generative questions are so powerful, hence, Lisa, why the guidebook? They surface strengths. You can create, there's so much you can do when you make generative questions part of your daily habit. Which brings me to the second question is positive framing. Talk about what you want instead of what you don't want. Talk about what's possible. So framing is sounds easy, but I'm going to walk you through the flipping technique because again, a lot of us can name it and do the frame without thinking about the flip when you get really good with appreciative inquiry and creating a frame. But I'm going to take a second and break this flip down for you. You have to let people name it. The problem, the complaint, the negative reactions, what's really going on here? We've got to spend time in that red part. And then you have to ask people, well, what's the positive opposite? Don't think too hard. Flip it. And when you're on that flip, if that flip was true, this is the principles of AI are working behind you. What's going on? What's the frame? What do we really want to be talking about? So the opening story in the Conversations Worth Having book is about a medical center, specifically the emergency room. And Alicia, the nurse manager, is talking about low patient satisfaction scores, takes high patient satisfaction scores for granted. But boy, when the scores are low, you're all my nurse managers, you're all going to hear about it. And she realized it wasn't helping things. She would go home in a negative mood. And she one day started doing some research and came across this appreciative inquiry in healthcare, which she was in. And she went to a workshop and she learned about appreciative inquiry. And the flip would be, low patient satisfaction scores. Just flip it. High patient satisfaction scores. Now, if you have high patient satisfaction scores, the frame could be a lot of things. And you could ask the people, what would be going on in our emergency room if we had high patient satisfaction scores? And I just put one of the frames in here. Well, obviously, patients are well cared for and they're highly satisfied. Okay, that's got to be going on somewhere. I didn't say the satisfaction scores were 100% unsatisfied. There are people who are satisfied. And that story was one of the stories that I heard way back when 30 years ago with David Cooper writing. It was about another situation. Is there something always going on right? And so what we're going to do is we're going to look for questions. What are examples of highly satisfied patients? Tell us the stories. Tell us the stories of what are staff doing well, and we're going to cross-train each other. So that's using the positive framing. The other thing I wanted to put into this presentation is think about that. Have you ever wanted to have a do-over conversation? You had a bad conversation. Usually it's after you walked out and you're like, I wish I could do that over. Again, one of the things we talk about in conversations worth having is the importance that if you walk out of a negative situation, it doesn't matter whose fault it is, that you tune in, pause, breathe, and get curious and ask yourself, what were the facts? Just the facts. What were the stories? What would you really like to have talked about to that person? And make an appointment with that person beginning with, I don't like the way our conversation went. I apologize for my role in it. Even if you're thinking it was the other person's fault, this is how you start the conversation. And I would like to start it over. And here's my intention. So back in 2018, Forbes interviewed Sherry and I when the book first came out and said, polarize, consider conversations worth having. And I'd have to say 7 years later, the world is still polarized. So that was a very important interview that we did, which brings me to the last question is how can your questions help others to soar? And SOAR came because of appreciative inquiry, because of what my dissertation was about. It was a capacity building framework. It was 300 pages. It was a qualitative dissertation. I always thought, if there's any doctorate students listening, I always thought that a dissertation had to have hypothesis and had to be quantitative based, or you were nothing. And I remember when I met with David Cooperwriter and Paul Silliponte to talk about what I wanted to prove and test, David said, Jackie, you have nothing to prove and everything to learn. And you're going to do a qualitative dissertation. And so I had to write like 8 statement of purposes before I got to the one that I thought could do it. And what came out of this was this capacity building framework around strengths and opportunities and values and vision and how to build capacity. No one's going to read a 300-page dissertation unless someone in a doctorate program makes you do it. And so what happened after my dissertation is I began to build this framework with the coaching of David Cooperwriter and Lynn Kelly and lots of colleagues to say, imagine if we could have conversations around strengths, opportunities, aspirations, and results. And the first article written was 2003 because we had to go out and to see if could we take this framework that was in the dissertation and really apply it to the world. And I encourage, if you're a student or a doctoral student, listen, put your work out there in the world. Earning a doctorate just gets you to point A. It's what you do afterwards that matters. Earning any type of degree just gets you that degree. It's what you do afterwards that's really important. So SOAR operating system is appreciative inquiry. And can you see the AI in SOAR? I didn't figure that out. 20 years after SOAR, my husband was like, hey, appreciative inquiry really is the operating system of SOAR. Look, there's an AI in there. That's the eye of a creative person. That was not my eye. That was my husband saying, yeah, AI is really in appreciative inquiry. It is the operating system of SOAR. And that really inspired me about a year ago to write the origin story of SOAR and how it connects to appreciative inquiry. So in the guidebook that we've given you for attending here, it talks about, these were the 4 original questions about strengths, opportunities, aspirations, and results. SOAR is simply, it's a framework. Over the last 20 years, we've learned that there's lots of different ways to pull out strengths, opportunities, aspirations, and results. So there's other questions in the guidebook if you want to do more of this in a different kind of way. This is how people use SOAR. They use it for strategic planning. It was originally designed for strategy and strategic planning to build the positive course. Sometimes I've done a full day workshop starting from strengths and possibilities, and we've created a value set for an organization that needed a value set. So it's really flexible that if you're living in strategy, strategic planning, there's a lot of work that you can do with SOAR. And this is just a selection of organizations that I put in here. Some of them I've worked with, some of them I have not, but they've sent me stories Oh, I've used the SOAR framework. Yeah, I've used the SOAR framework to do this, to guide us. And it was really helpful. So I just put this colorful slide up to say, SOAR is just a way of strategically thinking, planning, conversations, and leading. And you can use SOAR all by itself. You could use it for coaching. You could coach somebody. This didn't come out till almost 2020. What's going on for you? What would you like to create? Tell me about this possibility. And here's how you could walk people through SOAR. So this diagram is also in that little guidebook. People have used it for coaching. Think about it. We help organizations come up with strategies and strategic plans. We got to help ourselves come up with a strategy for ourselves and what is your plan. So that's another application of what SOAR is. So what I think is really important is be choiceful. What do I want my conversations to do? Whether you're leading yourself or 500 people in a summit, are you trying to increase engagement, boost creativity, foster trust and collaboration, strengthen relationships? Appreciative inquiry as your operating system is going to get you there. And if you have a fixed mindset, and if you're below the line, this is what begins to happen to you. So I end this presentation that I believe conversations are the heart of how you interact. And think about this. What is the tone of your conversations? Appreciative or depreciative? Where are your conversations taking you and others? How do your conversations make others feel? And think about this today. What is one small change or action that you can take today to really impact the next moment? So in a world where so many conversations may be separating us from the vast potentials, may the questions you ask not just change your world, but those around you. How'd I do on timing,
Nice.
Steve?
That's great. No, that's great. I think that, like you said, and this is timely and timeless, really. And
Do we have
so
time for questions before you
yeah,
take me in a deep
yeah,
dive
yeah,
direction from
yeah,
anybody?
yeah. That's what I think. I'm here. I'm thinking, there might be someone who wishes to come in and say hi. Would anybody like to come in? Maybe you can create a full screen with everybody, and we can all see each other. And would anybody like to come in? Just raise your hand and say hi and ask a question for Jackie. Yeah, Teo.
Did you say choiceful, Jackie? Be choiceful? Is that the word you used? I don't think I've
Yeah.
ever.
Yes. Intentional,
I love
choiceful.
it. Yeah. I don't think I've ever heard that word before.
I'm always making up words. Remember, language is socially constructed.
I'll use that one. Thank you.
Hi, Rihanna.
Hi, gosh, thank you so much, Jackie. This was awesome. And following the Johari window, um, I'd like to self-disclose a little bit, which is I'm pretty introverted. So I'm one of those people that I need to sit with something for a while. I rarely come up with an instant question, but that behavior doesn't mean I'm not interested or not riveted or not moved and so forth. I'm all of those things, and I appreciate so much this opportunity to learn again with kind of maybe a quarter turn on what I've learned before about appreciative inquiry. And I think it was a wonderful presentation. Other than that, I don't have like a substantive question right now, but I wanted you to know I was present and engaged.
Thank you.
Hi, Francis.
Yes. So, Jackie, thank you so much. This is all very meaningful to me in the work that I do. So, statements I want to make. So, I've worked a lot with World Cafe. It's based also on questioning and trying to, I don't want to say teach, prepare people to ask authentic, strategic questions is very hard because people start thinking on how do I construct the question, which is out here. They don't think on what am I curious about? What is I don't know? Where is there sensation in me I want to understand? So people don't think about asking questions based on something that they need, filling a gap or something like that. They think of constructing a question, which make us construct the same kinds of questions. That's one point I want to make. I don't know if you want to respond to that because the other is different.
Yeah, let me just say that SOAR has really taken off in the business world a lot because you can't have, and this isn't like a total presentation on SOAR. Um, I could spend 30 minutes telling you on the difference between SOAR and SWOT and why you should use both. But if you asked me 20 years ago, I was going to put SWOT out of business. No, 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 no. It's if I'm coming from an appreciative mindset, I really understand what SWOT is and why we use it, and what SOAR is and why we use it. So going to your question, Francis, is if I say to you, tell me your strengths, you got to elicit a story. I would say, so tell me about a time. This is why that you were thriving and flourishing. And from your story, I'm going to listen and I'm going to pull out your strengths that I hear and the ones that I make up because I'm hearing your story.
So the stimulus comes from the other person as context, not trying to come from inside of me.
It's like a both and.
Yes. So the other piece, I don't want to take too much time, is one of my greatest learnings about question was reading about two very high-level architects, and they were talking about building. And one of them was just going on about this edifice he built in China, blah, 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 blah. And his colleague said, tell me, how much does your building weigh? And the guy said, I'd never thought about how much my building weighed. It became a significant question because the point was so much material goes underground that doesn't need to go underground, blah, 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 blah. But when he wrote about it, he talked about what I learned from the question I never thought to ask. And if I follow your scenario about asking a person to tell me a story, there may be a question in there I never thought to ask, but in conversations, sometimes people ask a question that you never thought to ask, and it's a learning.
Yeah, that's being curious. And appreciative inquiry has also taught me that if I don't know the answer to a question, I got 28 other people here in the room. Does somebody else have an answer to it? It's okay not to know the
And
answer.
that makes it a good question because that's the other criteria. I'm not asking questions that are the answer to.
Yeah, you don't know the answer to, yes.
Thank you.
I see there's a couple other hands up.
Yeah, Amanda's been waiting patiently, and then
Okay, well, thank you. Jackie, I'm a super fan of yours. I have your book right here. You can see it. Just finishing my master's program and it was my favorite book. So thank you for that. I asked my question in the chat in case we ran out of time. What's the next step if I want to dive deeper into building my capacity to implement appreciative inquiry beyond reading, training, etc.?
That's easy. Practice,
Mhm.
practice, practice.
Mhm.
And literally keep a journal about your growth.
Mhm.
And like, for example, if you want to learn more about SOAR, there's a SOAR resource page, and I put a lot of free resources out there on the SOAR website. If you want to learn about appreciative inquiry, there's the Center for Appreciative Inquiry, the David L. Cooperrider Center for Appreciative Inquiry out of Champlain College by Lindsay Godwin, the director. And then there's the Center for Appreciative Inquiry in the Vegas area with Kathy Becker. Those are the two centers that have a lot of training. And if you want to learn more about conversations worth having, we do boot camps and training. So keep investing in yourself, but the best thing you can do is practice until it becomes second nature.
Yeah, that's good advice. Thank you. Appreciate it.
And Aggie, you have to forgive me because I want to say Aggie because like my grandma. So that's the American way of saying it, like Agnes.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you very much for this presentation and also for the handout. It's very useful. My question is centered more about how to help leaders create the curiosity in themselves so that they are able to come up with questions that come from curiosity. I work a lot with leaders, and I spend a lot of time with various methods to create that curiosity. We work with projections and so on. But my question is, what's your experience in that when you want to learn to make them come up with questions that come from curiosity?
Well, that's an awesome question, Aggie. And I wrote down, if I'm working with leaders, so when Sherry and I wrote Conversations Worth Having, we didn't have this chapter planned. Our editor's like, you need a chapter at the end for the skeptics who do not believe this. So it's chapter 7. It's not magic, it's science. I think we went back and forth like 40 drafts of that chapter to get it. We had like 5,000 words for it and get it down to it makes sense to a leader. They're skeptical, so they need to hear the science and like if you're a leader, HBR. The other awesome issue of HBR is Leading with Purpose that came out in 2020. The leaders want, because they're like, I don't know if I believe in this. They need the science behind this. And so that's what's really important is to give them the science and the HBR issues and the applications. And you know what? Sometimes you can't make them do anything and they'll come back to you when they're ready. But I find as long as I give them the science behind it, and even in Learning to Soar, when we did the 2021 edition in the beginning, we had to bring in more of, the Center for Positive Organizations, Positive Organizational Scholarship. But to leaders, you have to bring it in bite-sized chunks that they can get quickly and that they believe in the efficacy of what you're doing. That's a great question.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we're transitioning into the next phase of this. I think one of the questions that comes up for me is similar to one of the scenarios you had shared earlier. And so you're in a conversation that's not, the person that you're working with isn't as skilled as you are in having conversations worth having and using these tools. How do you gently redirect a conversation? What are a couple little practical tips for gently redirecting a conversation so that the person is asking questions themselves in ways that helps them to be a part of using the tools, maybe without even knowing it?
So okay, Steve, you're a little bit soft coming across, but you're asking if somebody.
How do you help a person in a conversation who doesn't have the tools gently redirect them in the conversation so that they're using some of the tools, maybe without knowing it?
Yeah. This is like called AI stealth. You're not teaching it, you're doing it. And this is where it gets back to practicing. I have been in really tense meetings, either the tenser and then there's me, or I watch two people with the tension going on. So if I'm witnessing two people going at it in the tense, usually I'll raise my hand and I will say, so we heard your perspective, Steve, and we heard your perspective, Theo. I'm going to share a third perspective if that's okay. So instead of saying you're wrong and I disagree with you, when you start telling people you're wrong, I disagree with you, that's not true. Where did we just put that person? We put them into they want to fight us. So that's why your language is so important when you're trying to help people who are two people even going at it, because no one has ever said to me, no, you can't say anything. So I think you have to learn, if you really understand the appreciative inquiry principles and how to ask a really good question, you can diffuse people. Also, I've been in meetings that are really tense and someone gets up and yells at somebody. And I've been with clients and saw someone treat a president bad. And usually what I say as the facilitator, this would be a great time to go on a break, everybody, and come back in 15 minutes and say, hey, Eric, can I talk to you for a second? And I've had to do that. And that's why I think in the OD, we have to be really good facilitators, because remember that iceberg, I don't know below the line what's going on. Did that person lose their dog? Did they not get enough sleep? Do they think they're going to lose their job? So when you're really kind to people and you ask good questions and you just tell them to take a deep breath and pause, I'm actually, before I even know anything about you, if I just ask you to pause and take a deep breath, I'm resetting the parasympathetics and I'm bringing you up to that line. That's why these practices can help when there's tension between two people or tension in the room.
Yeah, and I think that's where practice comes in, helping to
Yeah.
redirect in various conversations, depending on the person, and finding ways to pose the question, model the question, maybe, ask them a question about their question to clarify it, but getting them to clarify the question in ways that are more appreciative, without just the different subtle ways and so forth. I think that's really good. Well, thanks, Jackie. We're gonna switch gears and we're gonna talk about ODC for a moment. And David's here. David, are you want to join me in asking some questions? We can do that together. You have the questions there. We have a few questions, and we're asking them over and over again of the different people that are here for the last 30 minutes. And they are questions about the field of ODC that I think are fundamentally important, and they're going to inform our broader research study and research project that we have been working on, David and I and Ignacio and Danny Manfort and Ignacio Pavez, around these foundations and helping to establish and bring together the foundations and start putting together a structure to the foundations that will enable us to build on them as we move the field into what I would call the next level, and help it to evolve and more professionalized, and some other things that will help advance this work, because it's really important. And so let's jump in. You ready? And this is kind of like that football 2-minute talk show, like on ESPN, where they go, okay, 2 minutes, and we're going to go through really fast through these questions. But we won't go that fast, but we have some time to go through and just get your top of mind thinking around these. And then we'll be thematically analyzing all this work and continuing to bring it forward. And if you could bring Jackie in, yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. And so the first one is really your definition and description of the field, and how your view of the field has shifted over time for you. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Okay, that's great. So my definition today, and then it's very clear how it has shifted. My definition today, when I think of OD, and Steve and I have had these, it's organization development and change. And I see it as being very generative based. It's an evidence-informed practice, and we're always integrating inquiry. I'm more of a dialogical approach, systemic action to help organizations they have to adapt, optimize, they have to innovate and thrive. So I'm working out there with the organizations and creating solutions that eclipse problem solving, that has innovations. And I've been looking lately, I'd say in the last 2 years, at the regenerative literature, regenerative leadership, regenerative systems change. So that's where I'm seeing it today. The shift over time has gone for me from strength-based to, again, generative-based. And where I've been working with organizations is it's very strategic, relational, and getting back to regenerative. And then one thing that became really clear after working on conversations worth having, the Change Handbook and now for the Practicing OD book is, conversations are at the core of everything.
Gotcha. And what's, in your view, what sets ODC apart from other disciplines such as HR and training and development and IO psychology and fields that I consider human-centric fields, which includes coaching and even project management?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think OD, because they have the word organization development, that it's about human development, but in a caring place, about understanding resilience. So I believe if we're helping organizations, we're really helping the people. So my responsibility is to make sure you, the people, are better than when you came into my organization. Even if you leave my organization, that I have a moral responsibility to make sure I'm taking care of you. I'm taking care of our environment and our people and our customers, a very a stakeholder approach. So I think it's very, to me, OD is also very relational.
Gotcha. And have the current global challenges in our world and that we face, have they impacted that for you? How have the global challenges and the global, like just the global nature of all of business and organizations?
Yeah, I think we need to bring more civility into our world, into our organizations, to realize to share understandings. You might be here on your understanding on an issue. I might be here. To me, a shared understanding is we shared and I understand where you are and I ask questions and I don't have to bring you over to my side and I don't have to go to your side, but we have to find a way to move forward together.
Gotcha.
So that's what I'm hoping for given some of the global issues.
Dave, you want to ask any question, like maybe the next one around influential figures? What would you like to ask?
Yeah, I'd love to know, Jackie, who you see as key historical leaders and thinkers whose work really anchors the field of ODC.
Yeah. So historical, so probably the obvious, I always loved Kurt Lewin. Freeze, unfreeze, change. Kurt Lewin, he's one of my favorites. I like Richard Beckert's work because I like that. I think Richard Beckert built in like change. I mean, change can be unplanned, but I really like plan change. If I'm going to plan change and bring people together, I better have a plan and a strategy. Edgar Schein's work, my work, his work in process consultation, his work about cultures. Peter Senge, I read a lot about learning organizations, and I think I've got some current people, but I also think they're historical. So, Appreciative Inquiry has been around since 1985. So my work is definitely anchored in there. And Don Warwick, he's been around forever and, in the work that he does. So those are kind of like the people that I read something when it comes by of their work.
Yeah.
Thank you. And so, yeah, we would love to hear your perspective on current voices that are shaping the future of ODC.
So when I teach OD, I always have like the third or fourth, I teach them about whole systems change approach. And I use Steve, I use your articles. I use yours from 2010, 12 into the most recent. We do like a whole module talking about Steve Cady and in your work in, your work in whole systems has been really important to help learners understand what OD is. And obviously Cooper Ryder's work to me is historical, but I pay attention to the current and Richard Boyatzis, I'm just finishing I'm looking at his book, The Science of Change. 58 years he's been doing what he's doing. And, and what amazes me, I send Richard Boyatzis an email and he usually answers me within 8 hours if I have a question on something about, I asked him a question. This is really important. There's 40 leadership styles. I said, which one's the most effective? And not only does he usually send me an article or two back, he says, Jackie, it doesn't matter what style, just remember that leadership is relational. And I'm like, oh, this is such, that was such a good email exchange. And then I've been reading, I love Amy Edmondson's work on psychological safety. And then I've been reading, if I pronounce it right, Giles Hutchinson, Regenerative Leadership in Nature. I've been really understanding, for the Practicing OD book, we took a book chapter from Ariel Sullivan Rollins' daughter. I can't think of her other last name. She has a hyphen, but I call her Ariel. I've known her since 2010. She's in that regenerative space, and the younger generation is into that regenerative space. So I've been reading a lot on regenerative. And for popular press and fun, I like Brene Brown's work, vulnerability, trust, dear. So she's kind of my fun podcast, fun person. In the human brain. Do you guys ever listen to that podcast? Yeah, so that's kind of some of the newer stuff I'm paying attention to.
The Human Brain podcast?
Yeah, that's on NPR. It's usually on Sundays.
Very cool. I'll
Yeah.
check it
Or,
out.
no, Hidden Brain. It's called the Hidden Brain.
Okay, cool. Hidden Brain.
Yeah.
That's cool. So neat. So as we think about figures, models, tools, SOAR is a tool, model,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
What would be your top 5 lists of models, tools, or top 7 lists that you'd say, hey, you got to have these in your belt. We'll put SOAR in there. What else would you say put in your toolkit before you walk out? These are your top whatever that you would want to make sure people have.
So when I'm usually I get asked to do a lot on SOAR, but before I even get into SOAR, I tell people to pay attention to positive organizational scholarship as a discipline. They're going to come out. They're working on the 2026. They did a 2012 handbook. I think, to me, like POS is the umbrella, which they put appreciative inquiry under. They put OD under there. They put positive psychology, community psychology, corporate social. That's like it's a framework. It's a discipline. And then obviously appreciative inquiry. But I also love the literature of dynamic capabilities. TC, if I can pronounce it, TEEC. He's still writing quite a bit on dynamic capabilities. And I know I'm going to sound a little bit repetitive, but I've been looking at trying to understand what regenerative leadership, regenerative management means, because I've been a big proponent of sustainability, but regenerativity is doing more with less and trying to explain how do we understand, how do we regenerate ourselves and our organizations for good. So that's kind of some of the stuff that's informing my work.
Anything else you want to add that's important to the field of ODC?
Okay, I'm going to throw something out there. The other AI, artificial intelligence. I'm probably spending 4 hours to 6 hours a week understanding how can artificial intelligence be on my team, and understanding how do I help students to learn to use it authentically in the right way and not depend on it so that they're useless without it, because they're all using it. So the question is, how are we going to use it? So I'm really paying attention to artificial intelligence. And we have a chapter, bless you, Steve, in the OD book is how do we use it to help build, support, and learn so that it doesn't hurt your reputation, but that it builds it. So that's the other area that I'm full committed to, is understanding artificial intelligence. There's 5 or 6 programs out there. How do we use it to move forward?
Fascinating. I just met with a guy who works in artificial intelligence this morning before the session, and he has a workshop he does with children, and they write and publish children's books for other kids. And before they leave, they work with AI. They learn about creating stories, and they use AI to help them. And they create a story, proofs book, and there's all these kids with all their books published by them, and they're selling them. It's crazy.
So they're entrepreneurs too.
Yeah, right on.
Yeah.
And he says it makes them want to read more and want to write more, not stops them from writing or reading more.
And I would also say, and this goes with regenerative leadership, is understanding organizations as living systems is really important. That people are not cogs in the wheel, but understanding the complex adaptive systems, organizations as living systems is really important to me.
Cool. Hey, David, you want to ask the next one?
Sure. Looking at core competencies for practitioners, what would be 5 essential competencies for an OD practitioner?
I actually gave thought to this one. I kind of put them in order that I think you need to have these for the practitioner. Is I think the first thing you need to be really good at is tuning in. We talked about it in my presentation. And what is deep listening? Before you even ask a question, before you can ask a question, really listen. And then ask great questions. Ask questions that you don't know the answer to. Those are generative questions. Because we have to deal so much with people's problems and issues and things going wrong, how do we help them frame or reframe? You know, again, these are practice. How do you frame and reframe? And if we're going to bring about change, the fourth competency would be systems thinking, the navigation, the complexity. And then I think if we're going to impact the system, the other competency you need is you need to be a good facilitator. And David, you are one of the best people I've ever co-facilitated with. You do all of these. I'm so glad you're asking this question, but I have watched you do deep listening, ask questions, frame, you do systems thinking. You're an outstanding facilitator. You have all these, David. I'm sorry. I didn't even know you were going to be here today, David. So now I'm getting really excited. Ethical grounding. You have to have a moral compass and ethical grounding so that a practical thing you need is to build trust so that you can design things and adapt. And then you coach for resiliency and learning. So to me, you have all of these, David. That's what you get for answering the question. I didn't even think about these
Thank
with
you.
you in mind until I saw you today.
Well, thank you for the affirmation. That's nice.
No, I've worked with you, so.
I know, and Jackie embodies all these as well. So thank you so much. So let's turn to scholarship. What are the key essential competencies for scholars who want to advance the theoretical and empirical aspects of ODC?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I've got the two scholars right here for me. So when I think about scholars and I think of, I have to tell those listening, when I first met David was like, we were in Disney World, remember? We were at a conference in Disney World. But when I think of a scholar, you have to be really good at theory reading and theory building. So you got to be really good at critical thinking. So theory building, critical thinking. As a scholar, you have to be really good with research design and methodologies. You have to know qualitative and quantitative and mixed methods. So as a scholar, you have to be able, and you have to, a skill as you need as a scholar is iteration. I told you I had to come up with my statement of purpose 8 times until I could finally start my dissertation. And that was really hard because I thought the first statement of purpose was good, but boy, the last one was better. So I think you have to be good at that. And I think as a scholar and as a practitioner, you need openness to new paradigms and curiosities. Because if you tell a business person an organization is a living system, they might like go into that protect mode, and you've got to be able to bring it to them in a way that they're like, oh, this is really important. And I think what's really important as a scholar is once you have to be able to translate your scholarship into practice.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. And so when you look at your favorite articles and books, would you say, hey, here's my books on the bookshelf, and here are some key articles to make sure that you have kind of now in your digital library?
So I think if you're a student, I still liked Shine's process consultation. I think it was one of the first things I read in the late 90s. And Appreciative Inquiry, it was the first article I read by Suresh and David was Appreciative Inquiry and Organizational Life. I think that was one of the first articles, like that was like 1987. And then it was positive organizational scholarship. You guys know the 2003 book that came together, that those are the first, to me, that's foundational if you want to understand POS. You can go get the Oxford Handbook. There's going to be a new one coming out in 2027. But see if you can get your hands on the 2003 Oxford Handbook. And obviously, you know, POD5, practicing OD5, that the Wiley was willing to put together a 5th edition behind that book. And I believe in dialogical OD, so I like Jervis Bush and Bob Marshak's work, dialogical OD. So those to me are essential readings.
Yeah, what about the journal? Any journals that you think are good to go to, or digital platforms, or
Well, my bias in Appreciative Inquiry, and it's really inexpensive. I read the Appreciative Inquiry Practitioner. I like that it only comes out 4 times a year. So I read the Appreciative Inquiry Practitioner. I look at the Academy of Management, but I really like I think it's the Academy of Management Discoveries. Is that the newer one? So I'm an idea person, so I like that.
ideas.
Obviously, I love the OD Review, the Org Development Practitioner. I'm a real practitioner person, but I'll pick up the Journal of Applied Behavioral Science. I'll pick up that one as well.
And what about associations and field relevant organizations?
For OD, I'm part of both, and I always get them confused. But is it the OSDC, the one that costs $110? It's as ISODC.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I was looking at my checkbook the other night. ISODC, and then there's the OD, and thank you. I am part of those two. I am also part of the Academy of Management, and I'm actually part of the APA, the American Psychological Association. So those are probably the 4 associations that I belong to.
Yeah, got you. Okay. David, you want to close us out?
Yeah. So I am very curious about this question. When you consider the highest aspiration for the field of OD, what is that aspiration? What is it that the world is calling for? What is it that OD aims for at its highest purpose?
This probably won't surprise you, even though you said you're really excited to hear it. I think that we need to figure out, how do we bring people together to create an environment that works for all? How do we really listen to one another before doing our interventions and taking action? And that so I'm really hoping that, that since I've been around quite some time, that's why I'm looking into regenerativity, is a regenerative force for people everywhere. Whether you're doing an intervention with the government or a nonprofit or a for-profit, how do we get people to trust in one another and engage, even if they're thinking differently?
Cool. So I love the way you're framing that as a question. If you were to just to define the purpose of the field, like what is it that an OD practitioner does at their best?
I think we bridge, BRIDG. I think we can bridge disciplines together. I think we can create bridges for people to cross. So, I think the future is that, it just used to be, if I recall, it was OD, and now it's OD and C. So we bridged right there. So how do we link science, practice, and purpose for what we're doing? And that's why I'm like a proponent. Like, we're not like PMPM where we have certification. Because I think everybody should be ODing, doing org development and change. Not that you got to be certified in it, that I think we should be teaching this. And when we write who the audience is for the Practicing ODC book, yeah, it's for OD people, HR. No, it's for anybody who has to manage and lead people.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're bridge builders, whoever typed. Thank you, Theo.
Yeah. And thanks. So for all of you out there, a little gift for Jackie would be to just type in what's one thing you're taking away from today that you can use or
Hey,
want to
we did
reflect
great
on
on
or
timing.
remember.
It's 12:29.
Yeah. So for a little gift, give her a parting word of, this is my takeaway. This is how you impacted me, Jackie. This is something I'm taking forward. Just a little bumper sticker or something for her. And so, well, high five. Thank you. That was really
Thank you.
good.
Thank you for
Lots of
inviting me.
super,
People, thank you
yeah.
for staying.
Yeah, this has been great. This has been really great. So for everybody out there, have a wonderful day. I think we can see so many really good comments here from people that are taking away a lot of nice and useful and helpful and encouraging things from today. So thank you.
Hi,
And keep
Carol.
up the good work.
All right. Thanks for inviting me today.
Yeah. Thanks everybody. Thanks for coming. And David, good tag teaming with you here today.
Now, Carol, you're at the top of my screen. Good to see you.
And thanks for everything. Appreciate
Yeah.
all of
Thanks
you.
everybody. Have
I
a
didn't know you'd
great,
be here today, David.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, bye everybody. Have a great rest of the day. Bye for now.
Bye.
We'll see you next week. We have another good one. So just check them out. Yeah.